Hello, and welcome to Memorial Park in Marmora, right alongside the gently flowing Crow River. We're following an itinerary today through the mining towns of central Hastings. We're going to tell you the story today of one of the plaques that you'll find along this itinerary, located right behind me. It's the story of a man that I would bet you have no idea who he was. You have never heard of him. His name was Harold Colman Rickaby. Now you might say, why would the people of this community erect a monument to a person that is very unknown, you would never recognize? Well, Harold Colman Rickaby's main claim to fame is that he was largely responsible for creating one of the largest holes in the surface of the earth, and is right here at Marmora. So I'm sure now many of you should realize I'm talking about the Marmora iron ore open pit mine. So who was Harold Colman Rickaby? Well, he was born in England, in Yorkshire in the far north. He immigrated to Canada. He served in the First World War, and in fact he was awarded the Croix de Guerre by the government of France for valor. After the war, he returned to Canada. He attended the University of Toronto, where he obtained his bachelor's and his master's degrees, and then he joined the Ontario government in the Department of Mines as a geologist. Now, he was clearly a very bright person because he rose up through the ranks rather quickly, and in 1938 he was appointed Deputy Minister of the Department of Mines. But his greatest achievement was to bring about the first ever magnetic airborne survey of Ontario, and searching, of course, for the minerals under the surface of our province. This airborne survey led directly to the discovery of the massive deposit of iron ore. However, the interesting point was that it is located 120 feet below the surface under solid limestone rock. Well, in fact, prospectors have known about iron ore in this area for more than 100 years. Prospectors had found it in the Madoc area, they had mined it there. There was a smelter for a while, although ultimately they failed. Now you might ask, this deposit of iron ore, what is it? Well, in fact, it's magnetite iron ore. And the story of its creation is really quite interesting. About 1.8 billion years ago, when this earth was covered with the great seas, the water was filled largely with dissolved iron. However, at that time there was very little oxygen in the water. So over the ensuing millions of years, plants grew, they died, animals came and went, and this released oxygen into the great seas. This oxygen was then able to come together with the iron dissolved in the water, and this formed iron oxide. And the iron oxide, over the years, settled to the bottom in certain areas. After that, and again, we're talking about millions of years, the mud on the bottom of the Great Sea compacted and formed limestone. And here, as I mentioned, it formed 120 feet of solid limestone rock over the iron ore deposit. After this aerial survey revealed this deposit of iron ore, the Bethlehem Steel Company in Buffalo, New York, showed an interest. They came here. They did test drillings, of course, down through the limestone, and they found the iron ore deposit, and they found that it was a very rich deposit and of a fair size. It was about a half a mile long and about a quarter mile wide. So therefore they bought up the land and started the process of getting it ready for a mine. Bethlehem Steel originally considered putting a shaft down and mining in that fashion, but it was considered the most efficient way would be to have an open pit mine, remove the 120 feet of limestone rock, and mine in that fashion. So between 1952 and 1955, the Bethlehem Steel Company did come here, and they removed this overburden of limestone rock, 120 feet of it, and in fact they removed from it 20 million tons of limestone rock. Much of it I think you can still see in the great hills behind the current mine. So in 1995 the work began. They had removed the overburden and they started digging into the iron ore deposit. They drilled holes 60 feet down in that area. They deposited something like 38,000 pounds of explosives, and when this was set off, it released about 80,000 tons of iron ore for each blast. This was then loaded onto trucks. They brought in these immense mining vehicles and immense shovels. We've seen them in pictures on the television. And they removed this ore to a plant that they had built, and there it was crushed. It was crushed into smaller pieces, and from that it went to another mill where it was ground into a powder. And this powder was then mixed with some other materials, and it was roasted at 4,200 degrees Fahrenheit, and this was how they made pellets. And these pellets now were ready for shipment from the mine. So they were put on trains. They were called the ore train, and they would have 32 to 35 cars of iron ore pellets, and they would leave here, go down through Trenton, down to Picton, and then to the ore docks at Picton. Now during the winter season, they would dump there in a great reservoir until the spring and the shipping season, and as soon as the water opened, the great lakers could come in. They would load up. They would take on up to 25,000 tons of these iron ore pellets and head out across the lake to Buffalo, New York, to the Bethlehem Steel Company's factory, which was at Lackawanna, right near Buffalo. In the summer, they would have about 50 trips coming and going from Picton to Buffalo. Now, while I'm talking about these ore ships, I can't help but digress, if you'd bear with me for a moment. There is a very famous ore ship that many of us will be familiar with for very sad reasons, and that's the Edmund Fitzgerald. That Edmund Fitzgerald carried ore from Duluth, Minnesota down to the lower lakes. It made about 700 trips over the years. But on November 10, 1975, it made that fateful trip, leaving Duluth with 29,000 tons of iron ore. It got well out into Lake Superior, a great storm came up, and for unknown reasons, the ship sank very, very quickly with the loss of 29 lives. This tragedy has entered into Canadian folklore through the song written by Gordon Lightfoot, The Sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But to get back to Marmora, the mine operated for 22 years. Each year, they would take out about 3 million tons of rock and about 520,000 tons of iron ore, which, as we have described, was then formed into pellets and shipped out. The mill operated for about 22 years. Finally, in 1978, the economy was weak, the mine was not producing what it was before, and therefore it was closed with the loss of about 300 jobs and quite a serious impact on the community of Marmora. Although the mine was closed for several years, this might not be the end of the story. Just a few years ago, a company came forward with a concept. This mine, sitting here open, a large open pit mine, had about 500 feet of water in it. The total mine was about 700 feet deep. And they come up with the concept of pumping the water up out of the mine to a reservoir at the top. Do this at night when the hydro rates were low, and then when hydro was needed, they would release it down through chutes into turbines to create electricity. This concept was called the Pumped Storage Hydro Project and is still under discussion, and possibly someday the mine will once again come to life and be producing energy for us. So this is our visit to this particular plaque. We would invite you to take up this itinerary for the mining towns of central Hastings. Come on out, enjoy the lovely scenery, enjoy the Crow River, take a walk in downtown Marmora, and take a look at this plaque. Get out and enjoy the road trips of Hastings County.